Hi there, and welcome to this day in history for November 17th. November 17th is the 321st day of the year in the Gregorian calendar, with 44 days remaining until the end of the year. And today we're going to start back in 1558 when the Elizabethan Era begins. Queen Mary I of England died and was succeeded by her half-sister Elizabeth I of England. The long reign of Elizabeth, who became known as the Virgin Queen for her reluctance to endanger her authority through marriage, coincided with the flowering of the English Renaissance, associated with such renowned authors as William Shakespeare. By her death in 1603, England had become a major world power in every respect, and Queen Elizabeth I passed into history as one of England's greatest monarchs. In 1777, Articles of Confederation were submitted to the states. You'll remember that a couple of days ago, Congress had approved the Articles of Confederation. On this day, November 17th, 1777, Congress submitted the Articles of Confederation to the states for ratification. In 1800, the United States Congress held its first session in Washington, D.C. In 1839, Verdi's first opera opened. This was Oberto, and it debuted in Milan. I've placed a link to this in the show notes just in case you're curious to hear what it sounds like. We have some Civil War news from 1863. The siege of Knoxville, Tennessee began. In Egypt, the Suez Canal, linking the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea, was inaugurated on this date in 1869. 1925, American actor Rock Hudson was born on this day. 1933, the United States recognized the Soviet Union. Now, we've already mentioned a birthday, but we're going to take a break in the chronology right here for just a moment to recognize that there are many notable birthdays on this date, November 17th. For example, American soldier, politician, senior senator of Oklahoma, Jim Inhofe, Canadian singer, songwriter, and guitarist, Gordon Lightfoot, American director, producer, screenwriter, and actor Martin Scorsese, American model and actress Lauren Hutton, American actor, director, and producer Danny DeVito, American baseball player and sportscaster Tom Seaver, and of all people, RuPaul. All have birthdays on this day, November 17th, in different years. In 1958, the Kingston Trio brings folk music to the top of the U.S. pop charts. Their song, Tom Dooley, hit number 1 on the Billboard pop chart. And while they might not have wanted to acknowledge it, the fans of 1960s protest folk music owed probably the very existence of the movement to these three guys in crew cuts and candy-striped shirts who honed their act not in freight cars or Greenwich Village cafes, but in fraternities and sororities of Stanford University in the mid-50s. In their music, as in their physical appearance, the Kingston Trio betrayed little discomfort with the socio-political status quo of the 50s. Yet without the enormous profits their music generated for Capitol Records, it is impossible to imagine major label recording contracts ever being given to some of those who would challenge that status quo in the decades to come. Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, for instance, may have owed their musical and political development to forerunners like Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger, but they probably owed their commercial viability to the Kingston Trio, who introduced the astonishingly fresh sound of a 100-year-old folk song into the American pop mainstream of 1958. The song Tom Dooley was probably first sung sometime in 1868 after a North Carolina man named Tom Dooley was hanged to death for the murder of his fiancée, Laura Foster. Thanks to extensive coverage in major newspapers like the New York Times, the trial of Mr. Dooley made him something of a national cause célèbre, and he proclaimed his innocence of the murder even as he stood in the gallows. I've included a link to this one in the show notes as well. In 1962, President John Kennedy dedicated the Washington Dulles International Airport serving the Washington, D.C. region. Oh my goodness. In 1968, TV viewers became outraged because an NFL game was cut off to air Heidi. Viewers of the Raiders-Jet football game in the eastern United States were denied the opportunity to watch its exciting finish when NBC broadcast Heidi instead, prompting changes to sports broadcasting in the U.S. The Raiders had scored 2 touchdowns in 9 seconds to beat the New York Jets, but no one outside the stadium saw it because they were watching the previously scheduled movie Heidi instead. I think they had like 90 seconds left in the game, and some guy up in the switch room said, "Well, it's time to start the movie now." Yeah, outrage poured in. Holy cow. They don't do that anymore. No. They'll move other stuff later. 1968, the SALT negotiations began. Soviet and U.S. negotiators met in Helsinki to begin the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. SALT. This meeting was the climax of years of discussion between the two nations concerning the means to curb the Cold War arms race. So you had SALT, and then later on you had SALT II. I remember that, but maybe we'll talk about SALT II another day. On this day in 1970, the My Lai trial begins. The court-martial of First Lieutenant William Calley. He was a platoon leader in Charlie Company. He had led his men in a massacre of Vietnamese civilians, including women and children at My Lai. In 1972, oh my goodness, on this date in 1972, a wealthy heiress was murdered by her son. This is a long and complex and very twisted real-life tale of dysfunctional family dynamics and mental illness. And I'm not going to go into it in any more detail than that right here, but you can find the link to the story in the show notes. It's quite a story. If you tried to make a fictional movie out of it, probably people wouldn't believe it. Oh, come on, that's too outrageous. I mean, it's that kind of story, and it really happened. Moving on. 1973, Nixon insisted he's not a crook. I remember that. And in 2003, the Terminator became the Governator. Actor and former bodybuilder Arnold Schwarzenegger was sworn in as the 38th governor of California at the state capitol in Sacramento. And I think we're going to let that be it for today. As always, links to my research are included in the show notes. Thanks for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And feel free to share if you found this video interesting or informative. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. All right, let's try this again. I don't know, and I'm not going to look it up. So we're just going to jump right on over to blah, 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 coffee mug. It's late enough in the day that we're off coffee and on fizzy water. Just read the words. Just read the words. That's a lot of words. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? She's not a man. What a world. Sure would be nice if I could ever read one of these in its entirety without having to start anything over. That would be awesome. I might have to take another look at that. I'm going to have to look at that. This is why I don't do live shows.